Hey guys, welcome to this week's podcast episode. And I'm really delighted about today's guest, Lawrence Dunning, coming from the city of Chicago. And he advocates a very interesting concept of using money to buy back your time as opposed to using money to buy things or this consumption, this rat race. So I'm really excited to have him on the show to talk about this idea for the audience. A lot of the audience are doctors, lawyers, and so it's kind of this new slant. So Lawrence, welcome.
Oh, thank you so much. It's a pleasure to be here and thank you for having me.
Yeah, you have what's really interesting is you've kind of incorporated a lot of Eastern philosophy, martial arts, finance, real estate, and so talk about how you incorporated all this, what you do now, and I know you have a beautiful house, family, and so talk about how you achieve this.
One thing I was always very passionate about sacrificing today for a better tomorrow. So I remember as a teenager, I would have all these jobs that typical teenagers do. And my dad is back in England. He would say, listen, like you can spend the money now, you earn money. But if you invest it in the British stock market at the time, we were kind of in a bull market. He's like, you wait a year or two, you're going to make a lot of returns and you're going to have more money. So I always, ever since a young age, I always had a good work ethic and I was interested in trying to get some knowledge to make some returns on what I had, to try and be a bit more efficient with my time and my money. And then in my 20s, I was in trading. I was in a trading company and I made all this money and they just gave me a fraction of it. So I was like, I think I can do this myself. So me and an older trader, we set up our own trading company. I did really, really well. And then I got to the stage where I was 30 and I realized that I was a multimillionaire. I had a few $1 million in my trading account, but I lived a very simple lifestyle. I had a one-bedroom condo. I would go trading. And then after I was really into martial arts, I would go to the gym after. I was very focused. And I thought, wow, I have a whole lifetime to make money, but I have a very small window to do something physical, like being a professional fighter. So I actually took 5 years sabbatical and I traveled around and I ended up having 9 professional fights and I did a bunch of amateur jiu-jitsu tournaments and I did a bunch of marathons, just really physical, cool physical stuff. And then I thought, well, when I'm done with all my adventures, I can just go back on the trading floor and keep making money. But what I didn't understand, Chris, is that when I was gone, the whole business model of small groups trading was taken over by these high frequency traders. So I was like, man, what am I going to do? So I kind of had this early midlife crisis. And luckily, I realized during the one smart thing I did when I was wealthy is I bought this big commercial building. So I started to learn all about investing in real estate. And I realized, I don't know about you, but for me, I have a traditional financial education. I have an MBA in finance. And I was in the financial world for the first 10 years after graduation. And no one ever talked about real estate. It was always stocks, bonds, and cash and different ratios. And because real estate is very specific to the area you're in, I felt like I don't think I had one professor in my MBA class or even talk about it. So I became so passionate about this idea of just trying to spread the knowledge of real estate investing and then end up getting my real estate license. And now I do real estate brokerage. I do ground up construction. I partner with developers. I'm all in the world of real estate. And I just love it because it gives you, there's two ideas, right? People think, I want to make money so I can buy XYZ. But I always looked at money as it gives us freedom. So we can buy back our time. So if we want to take a 5 year sabbatical to follow passions, we can do it. Or if we want to take a month off, we don't have to be forced to do something we hate doing, just to pay the bills. And I think that's a problem. One thing I've noticed being in America is I love America. I got my citizenship last year and I love what it stands for, the idea of freedom and opportunity. But I think so many people get caught up in thinking, if I just make all this money, if I sacrifice now for 2 decades become a partner in my law firm, then I'm going to be happy. And I realized that you can't think about it like that. You have to just be happy now. Because if you think, if I make this much money, I'll be happy, you're going to waste the best decades of your life. And I think it was Will Smith wrote in his biography when he was young and broke, he had the idea like, if I can make it and make success, then I'll be happy. And then he became really famous and wealthy and he realized like, I'm still unhappy. And then you have no hope, you lose your hope. So I just love that idea of not thinking money's going to save you. But also at the same time, I don't want to be a broke hippie who can't buy anything. I still want to use money as a tool to make my life better. So I think it's that dichotomy. And I think that's why you and I have a lot of mutual interest in just financial education and learning about how to use money, not let it use you.
Yeah, yeah. It's interesting because you talk about I loved martial arts and I loved Eastern philosophy and you know what's interesting is you talked about because money in the West is viewed as a status thing. It's like how much you have or how much you make, and this makes you better than this person or that person, or you get this attention and that whatever. And actually, I'm here taking a sabbatical summer in Europe, and everybody's educated and everybody's well-to-do. There's not this constant status where you have people are trying to kind of showed in it's such a mind-boggling thing. But talk about what I was interesting is you talked about importance of real assets in this financial climate, and I've been reading this book, and it's talking about how the financial elite and the governments are purposely trying to make everybody poor so that they're manipulating the money supply. And so talk about importance of real assets in this financial climate.
Definitely, Chris, because one thing I'm quite pro. Obviously, I work in real estate, so I'm very pro real estate. But I always tell people, friends, anyone that will listen, I said, listen, we live in a world where if you look back 100 years, the purchasing power of the dollar has just been steadily eroding for a century. So that's just the system. So the book you mentioned, sometimes people take a bit more of a conspiracy theorist approach. I don't know how much of it is conscious and how much of it is just the system. But I think so, everyone knows that there's those famous memes about Nancy Pelosi's net worth has gone up. Her husband is a better stock picker than Warren Buffett. And a lot of people are like, well, she's probably got the inside scoop. That's why she's making all this money because she knows what's going to happen. And her husband trades options, which gives a massive return. But I think the system that we live in is just by its nature, things are going to keep getting more expensive because the thing we're pricing it in, the purchase power of the dollar is going down. So I really like the idea of you can do things like if you look at the value of real estate in over the last 20 years, but you price it instead of pricing it in the dollar, which has been depreciating, say you price it in terms of the S&P, real estate is actually very cheap right now because it hasn't gone up. It's actually gone down relative to stocks. Bitcoin's the extreme example because Bitcoin's done so well the last decade. So if you price things in terms of Bitcoin, it looks like everything's so cheap and that the stock market has had a terrible run if you price it in Bitcoin. So I think I love the idea of life as a game because then we look at how am I going to best play the game, right? I'm going to learn the rules. So unfortunately, the rules is I have a 3.5-year-old son and I can't wait to teach him is, listen, we can be bitter and angry about the rules. We can just accept it and we can accept that politicians have been corrupt and greedy for 100 years. It's not going to change now. So what is the system we live in? And then we have to get assets to protect ourselves in that system because so many, you're a physician. I work with a lot of physicians. I work with a lot of attorneys. I work with a lot of professionals who are so good at their field, but they don't know much about money. And I try and help them, show them like, hey, listen, for you, even if you bought a building that didn't even make money, because it broke even, you're going to make so much every year when you do your tax returns, you're going to have so much tax write-offs and depreciation. So for high income earners and professionals, for them, of course, you want to have a bit of income with the building, but for you, it's really about the tax benefits. Whereas if you're, say, a 28-year-old who's completely burnt out with his job and he made all this money in his early 20s and he wants to travel the world. Well, for him, he doesn't really care about the tax benefits because he wants to take a sabbatical and travel. He's more interested in income and just like something that's going to maintain value of his money. So it's trying to find these tools that work for you and your disposition that's going to protect you from the inflationary world we live in. And, some people do it with precious art. I have a friend who does it with Rolexes. There's a huge secondhand Rolex market. I know nothing about that. We have to find that niche, Chris, what we're interested in, what we're passionate about in order to protect ourselves. Because I would say physicians, attorneys, you guys work really hard. Like you want to, whatever you make, you want to protect it and save it and have it grow and not let it just get eaten up by the depreciating dollar.
Yeah. Yeah. Physicians in general, we work very hard, but we don't work very smart. And so it's just kind of like my goal to kind of have this podcast to kind of educate, this idea of money and, really what's going to protect you is you have to hold assets because,
Yes.
with inflation and interest rates and debt and taxes, you have to clear a really high return, almost like 15% or more to just stay even. And
Yes. Can I say something about that, Chris? So there's two things I want to say on that because I work with a lot of professionals. And I'm the first to admit I have the same problem too. All of us don't know what we don't know. So for instance, before I became a dad, I was like, oh, the best years of my life are behind me. I'm definitely never going to be as happy as I was before when I was younger. And now I'm so much happier because I feel like I have more purpose. I love being a dad. So like I didn't know 4 years ago what I know now. And I think we can always, it seems like a silly thing to say, but I want to say it. There's a lot of people, if you're elite in your field, whether you're a professional athlete, whether you own, you're an entrepreneur, you own a company, whether you're a top surgeon at your hospital, you're elite. So you're used to being really competent. But a lot of times you don't know what you don't know. And one of those things might be how to protect yourself from inflation, for instance, with money. And one thing I learned the hard way when I was young and I made all that money is it's two very different skills to make money and then preserve your wealth. And I thought it was one skill. So I focused when I was young on how to make money. And I've always been good at making money because I work hard and I'm very entrepreneurial and I take risks. But if you look back, I write about this in my book. I've been terrible historically with the way I've preserve my wealth. I've made every mistake that a human can make pretty much. So that's a really good lesson too for people to remember, especially if your audience is doctors and physicians and professionals, is have a little bit of humility because we all don't know what we don't know. And I think that's one of the reasons that I love podcasts. And I'm so happy that you're doing what you're doing is you're just spreading the knowledge of this and you're letting people see blind spots because I'm 45 and I've been a lifelong learner about many different subjects. And I feel like I have more questions today than I did at 25. So it's good to have that kind of humility where you're always learning and you're trying to seek out more education and knowledge.
Yeah, yeah, I love it. We'll talk about, living the jiu-jitsu lifestyle and also travel and curiosity. One thing I wanted to ask you about real estate, because if I ask any of the wealthy, like the millionaires, the multimillionaires, they've always had real estate as a component. But I'm
Yes.
looking at the performance of real estate, and it's like getting expensive every year. And you've got taxes, you've got maintenance, you've got HOA, you got climate change ruining everything, right? You got insurance,
Yes.
and it's like such a pain. Like it's like such a pain to. So, is there another asset class that's easier and better that gives you the same advantages as real estate without all of this hassle? Like no counterparty risk. You own it outright. You can leverage it. You can borrow against it. What are your thoughts?
That is such a great question because you're exactly right. So many people hear, oh, real estate is a passive investment, but you just listed a bunch of different things. You have to deal with tenants. What happens if your tenant stops paying? You have to deal with maintenance of the building. You have to pay your taxes, and property taxes tend to go up like every tax. So you brought up a really good thing. What I'll say a couple of things about that. Just talking about real estate specifically, because you're originally from Texas. And I have a client from Dallas who owns a couple of buildings in Chicago. So she's buying buildings in Chicago because she can't make a return on her money in Texas, but she can still in Chicago. So historically, the Midwest of the US has the highest cap rates and returns. But right now, with rates being so high, investors are paying 8% for their loans right now. I think maybe it's gone down a little bit, but it's close to 8%. So a lot of the time, you'll actually just be breaking even on a building. So you'll say, well, why would you do that? Why would you have all like you said, the counterparty risks to just break even? Well, it's because every time you pay down your mortgage, some of that is principal. So on an $800,000 building, maybe your loan right now is, I don't know, 5,500. Then you have your taxes, you have all these different expenses. Of that 5,500, maybe 1,000 is principal. So you're basically paying down the loan $1,000 a month. So even if you break even, you're actually still making $1,000 a month. Plus, then you have every year when you do your taxes, you're going to save money on your taxes depreciation. But if you buy a building with 25% down, which is what most investors do, if it goes up 5%, you've actually made 4 times that, right? Because you've bought with leverage. So that's the other secret. So what you said is right. Most of the uber wealthy have vast real estate holdings. And it's not necessarily just purely for the cash flow. It's for over long term. It's the depreciation. It's really, it's when you have a lot of appreciation in a good market, you can sell a building and you can do a 1031 exchange. You don't have to pay taxes on your return. So there's all these kind of tricks and tips that people like. But I think right now, anyone that's buying property right now, it's a lot of moving parts. So what most people do is they get a good property manager. They manage everything that kind of takes a lot of the legwork from the owner. Then you're very selective with tenants, so you try to minimize your eviction risks, and so you have all these ways you can do it. But you're right, it's a lot of moving parts. I think you get paid for it, but if someone said, "Hey, listen, this is way too much," I would say, I really believe in Bitcoin, but it's still very volatile. It's very early. I wouldn't put more than 5% of my net worth in there. I like real estate. I like the S&P. The S&P is most of the S&P now is made up of a few of these tech companies, and it seems like they're going to keep going. I don't see a world in which tech isn't playing a huge part in the American economy. So I really like that too. So I think it's some people love to try and pick stocks, like they're all about like researching companies and doing things like that. Then they probably want to stick to stocks. Other people just love real estate, and some cultures are very heavily invested in real estate. Like it's almost like a cultural thing that the parents explain to their kids when they're young, like this is the surest path to wealth. So we have to find that niche. But I'll give you a random statistic. The most wealthy passenger that drowned on the Titanic was Jacob Astor the fourth, and he was
Wow.
the great grandson of Jacob Astor, he was a fur trader in the early days of American colonialism. I think he was German, a German fur trader, and he started getting all these fur profits, and he would buy property in Manhattan. And he was called the landlord of Manhattan. This is when New York was first growing, and he made so much from New York real estate that he was not only the first millionaire but the first multimillionaire in American history. And it's so interesting that 4 generations later, his great grandson was still the wealthiest person on board of the Titanic, and there was a lot of wealthy people on there. But that just shows the idea of real estate as a legacy to maintain wealth over time. So I think like we talked about, any asset is good. You don't want to put your money in a depreciating asset. But I'll give you one more thing about real estate that I just learned myself. I should have known this, but this is fascinating. If you rent the place you live in, so you don't own it, you're not neutral real estate. You're actually shorting the real estate market, because at some point you're probably going to want to buy something, or if you don't, your rent is going to creep up. So a lot of people, in order to be overweight in real estate or invested in real estate, you have to own your primary residence, and you have to own some type of rental property, and only then are you actually kind of exposed to the upside of real estate appreciation. Because if you just own your house and it goes up, unless you want to sell it and move to a different country or something, you're assuming you're always going to need a house to live in. So it doesn't really matter if it's worth 400,000 today and 800,000 in 5 years. Unless you want to leave the country, it doesn't really help you, because you're going to have, if you sell it, you have to buy another house. It's also probably doubled in the same time period. So it's a really interesting concept about people that are renting. You're really exposed to the upside of the real estate market. And we've seen that. I don't know the Texas market, but in the Midwest, the last couple of years, rents are up massively. So a lot of people are struggling. And I always feel, Chris, I always feel for the person who's, say, they're a struggling family, and she's working and he has a job and a side hustle, and they're renting and they don't have any assets. And over the last few years, they've got crushed because we've seen everything go up so much. Yeah. Whereas, the politicians with these huge real estate holding portfolios and a bunch of real estate and equity portfolios, they've all had the best few years of their life because everything's just gone up so much. So it's just, I'm trying to spread that message that you don't have to, if you're struggling, you don't have to buy a house. You might not have a huge amount of money for your down payment, but there's these little tricks and tips. So for example, in Chicago, they have this program in certain areas of the city where they'll give you a $20,000 grant for a first-time home buyer. And so with some seller credits, you can almost buy a 3-unit building for free in certain areas. Or the physicians, there's incredible physician loans where they have really good rates of interest, no PMI insurance, and you can buy with zero down, a multi-unit in a lot of states. So I think trying to get that knowledge of how can I best play the game and see what's available to me and make use of the best options for your future self.
I love that. And then we talked about the importance of holding real assets and real estate versus others. It's all, again, diversify, and it's all about asset allocation, just kind of hedging. But really, all of it is about quality of life. It's not about you can say your net worth is this and that, but really, at the end of the day, we're all going to the grave, so we can't take it with us. So talk about the habits of travel and curiosity, and really using money to enhance your quality of life, as opposed to make it kind of like a rat race that you described.
Yeah, exactly. Well, thank you for saying that, because that's something I'm so passionate about. I'll never forget when before I set up my own trading company, I worked for this company that sent me to America, and my boss absolutely hated me. He was like a bit of an insecure guy. He was an American guy, and his wife was English. And I remember when he didn't really have anything against me or anything, but the first day I met his wife, she was like, "Oh my God, Lawrence, I absolutely love you. You remind me of my brothers back home." And she's giving me all these compliments. She obviously said something to the guy, because the next day I went to work and he had it out for me. And I remember for months I was in the trading pit with this guy, And every time I did a trade, he would scream at me because if it was good, he's like, why didn't you do more? And if it was bad, then he's like, I don't like it. But the ironic thing is, I was a newer trader and I was making money, and he was the boss, but he was a horrible trader. He would lose money all the time. He would take the biggest bonuses. He was just a horrible human. The idea of like of fuck you freedom, of fuck you money, is that it's basically you can say fuck you to any situation or horrible boss or anything that it just gives you. It takes that element of misery out of your life. And I'll never forget one day he yelled at me. And I went to the bathroom and I had these trading sheets and I took a pen and paper at the back and I'm writing how many more days did I have to put up with this guy to make like 2 more bonuses so that I could leave. And I was going to change careers. I actually wanted to go to chiropractic school. I was like, I want to do something different. And it was like 440 days. And I remember thinking, wow, I think I can do it, but oh my goodness, they are going to be so miserable. And thankfully, about 3 months later, I ended up leaving and starting my own company. So I didn't have to put up with him that long. But I think the idea of just money solves your monetary problems, which is a huge stress for a lot of people, especially families with kids and dependents. Like, so you can take out the monetary stress. But the other thing you can do is you can buy back your time and you can spend it on experiences as opposed to possessions. And I always think, I mean, most of the positive psychology studies will back this up. If you buy, say when I was really wealthy, if I bought a Lamborghini, it would have definitely been fun. Picked up some girls, had a good time, but I would adapt to it very quickly. Whereas when you spend money I love spending money on travel and trips and experiences. I feel like when all's said and done, they're going to be some of my fondest memories. So it's trying to figure out what you can spend your money on to enhance your quality of life. And I think that's huge. Like the most expensive trip I've ever taken was I ran a marathon in Antarctica. It was very hard to get to, and it was a very expensive trip. And but I'll never forget that week. That was one of the most special weeks of my life. So I think trying to find out what makes you happy, and obviously you love travel. Looks like you said you're in Europe right now, taking a sabbatical. I don't think you'll never regret this, right, Chris? Like your future self will never regret you stepping back from the rat race and doing something that's going to be a lifelong memory. And just the idea of like curiosity is every time I travel, I feel like you're exposed to different cultures and different mindsets. And I feel like I come back as an upgraded human. I have more just experience and more appreciation for different things and more awareness of what I don't know. So I love travel. I think that's something in Europe that we really, because America is so vast, you can spend years just traveling. You don't even leave the country. You can go East Coast, West Coast. There's all these different places to go, Hawaii, Alaska. But when you're in Europe, because Europe's much smaller, people travel a lot more. And I think just traveling is the best gift that I can recommend anyone, especially a young person, but anyone at all. Is I feel like if I had no reason to live, I feel like the first thing I would do is I'd get a one-way ticket to a Cambodian orphanage and I would just volunteer for a few months. And I guarantee you, after a few months of being there, I'll have some purpose and a reason to live. And I wouldn't know about that unless I'd been to Cambodia and I'd spent time with these orphans and just had such a wonderful experience and just seen these beautiful people that grow up with nothing and they're still just happy and they're making the best of what they've got.
Yeah. Yeah, I love that. And the time that I spent out of the United States, it's more like kind of, when we're in the States, we think we're the center of everything, but actually
Yes.
people in their everywhere is like they're actually in their own worlds and they have their own problems and they have their things to deal with. So it's really interesting. Talk about your book as well as you have a podcast that people can follow and check out. I really enjoyed this conversation. We have so much in common.
Oh, thank you so much. My podcast, Enter the Lionheart, that was a play on my old fighting nickname was Lionheart. But it's really about things like this. Like I love talking to entrepreneurs, to former athletes, to people in real estate, in business, people that doctors that talk about happiness and just physical health. It's just it's almost been a wonderful journey of self-education for me. And I'm sure the same as you. So that's available on iTunes, Spotify. And I try and have conversations like this where I just try to get a different perspective and learn something. And then the book, Forgotten Asset Class. If anyone listening to this, find me on Instagram or LinkedIn, Lawrence Stunning, shoot me your name and address, and I'm going to mail out 10 copies to the first 10 people that message me. But it just talks a little bit about my own story, about how I made every mistake because I didn't know any better. And I learned the hard way. And I really just want to spread that message to people, Chris, is if there's one thing we just had the publishing party a few weeks ago, but I've already had some people say, hey, my parents were going to sell their place. They decided to rent it and keep it now. And it's just, you hear those stories and it's just, even if people just realize that real estate is an option, because a lot of people don't even think it's an option if they don't know how to go about it, is find someone like me in your state who does real estate, and they can give you some good advice, and they can introduce you to some, not just maybe a good property manager, maybe a good off-market property. Just try to learn a bit more, because even if it's something you don't want to, it might not be something you want to focus on, but at the very least in time, if you can just have one rental, it'll just give you another source of revenue. You get all these tax benefits. I just think it's so beneficial. And a lot of people get addicted. They're trying to buy a property every year. And I think that's so cool. But I always think, because if we can do something today that our future self will be grateful for in 5, 10 years, I think that's the best way to live our life. I'd love to send some copies to anyone listening, and I just want to keep spreading that message of just positivity, and let's all try and live our best lives and be grateful for the human experience. And it's hard to do that if we're just so stressed about money. So I know a lot of people are dealing with monetary problems, but if I can just try to help people get out of that, then it leaves us free to just enjoy life. And I don't know about you, Chris. I was driving to the city this morning, and I saw a huge accident on the highway. I was so late because it blocked like 4 lanes of traffic, a huge accident. I just made me appreciate the fragility of human life. And I find arrogance and hubris such a silly thing, because it doesn't matter how successful someone is today. There's always ups and downs in life. And having had many times in my period in my life where I've been up or I've been down, I just have so much more of appreciation for when times are good. Let's just try and enjoy it. Enjoy the little things, enjoy the health, enjoy meeting nice people. It looks like you're in a beautiful rental in Europe right now. I really hope you're going to enjoy your trip. Well, let me ask you, where are you right now?
Right now, I'm
Which country?
in Copenhagen. So
Copenhagen, Denmark. I've never been.
beautiful country, and people, they're outdoors and they're laughing, and just it's just different. It's just different mindset, and they're more community oriented, and just nature. So
I love that. No, every time. So my mom's originally from France, and I'll go there for the summer, and I'll see my parents for a week. And you try and do something. I tried to rent a car at 2 o'clock, and they're like, "No, sorry, we're closed everyone's having a nap. Come back at 3:30." And it's just, as an American, now I'm integrated in American culture. I'm always like, "What the hell? I want to get my car." And then I take a second. I'm like, you know what? Good for them. They're taking a nap. That's the way it should be. We should be working to live, not living to work. So kudos to you for just exploring and going to cool places and seeing how other people live, because America has so many wonderful things. But I think most people probably, when all's said and done, they're going to regret working so hard and wish they'd taken a bit more time to do things that you're doing. So that's really awesome.
I really enjoyed this conversation, and for the audience, be sure to contact Lawrence, check out his book, and follow him on all his socials. And with that, thanks so much for coming on.
I appreciate